Hello, everyone. Welcome to Menopause in the Workplace, a very important discussion brought to you by Prevention and Healthy Women with great support from Astellas. I'm Sarah Smith, the editor-in-chief of Prevention, and my colleagues at Healthy Women and I have noticed that menopause is starting to have a little bit of a moment. And it's great to see women talking a bit more about it, but it's still pretty taboo in the workplace, and that's a problem. So we've gathered an amazing panel today to dig into this, led by journalist, news anchor, and now menopause advocate Tamsin Fidel. You can find her not only on Pix 11 in New York City, but on TikTok, where her menopause talk is changing the conversation. She'll be joined by three other smart and insightful panelists today. Sure, she'll be joining us in just a moment, and then she's going to introduce the rest of our panel. Thank you. Hi, Tamsin.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here today. Like you said, it's so crucial we not just talk about menopause, but how it affects us at work, where we spend so much of our time, and how the workplace can do more to support the millions of women, working women, who are at the height of their careers and experiencing perimenopause and menopausal symptoms. So let's go ahead and talk about the panel we have joining us today. I'll introduce them. First, Dr. Octavia Cannon, a board-certified physician at Alliance Obstetrics and Gynecology in Michigan. She's also a 2023 member of the board of directors of the American Medical Women's Association. Then we have Jen Sweeney, a patient advocate, author of the book, You've Got to Be Kidding Me, Perimenopause Symptoms, Stages, and Strategies, and founder of Periwinkle, a movement and site to help women thrive in midlife. And Leslie Salem, a certified health coach specializing in menopause, as well as a founder of Over the Bloody Moon, which delivers training, events, and learning resources to help organizations become menopause friendly. Thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So I'm excited to get started. And Dr. Cannon, I want to start with you. And I know it might seem simplistic, but I think it's really important because there's always confusion in this space. Let's start by defining menopause and when it starts for most women. And then I want to talk about the symptoms.
Sure. Good afternoon, ladies, and those out there listening. Thank you for joining. So menopause is the time in a woman or a person with female anatomy's life when she stops having a menstrual cycle for one complete year. So I've had patients who stop for 10 months and then they started again, and they think that, oh, I thought I was in menopause and now I'm not. That's not true. So it's one complete year with no menstrual cycle. And that includes a decrease in the hormones that your ovaries give off. So that is one of the reasons why you have different symptoms. The menopause state can start with what we call perimenopause, which means not quite menopausal, but you start having the symptoms. You may still have periods or menstrual cycles irregularly. So that can happen anytime between 40 to 55, depending on your body and how your ovaries operate. Certainly, there are some times when you have something called premature ovarian failure, and you may have someone who stops her periods or becomes menopausal early. The youngest patient I've ever seen was 25 years old, unfortunately. So there are things that can be done for that, and that's really a different subject, but that just tells you what menopause is. Things that you may experience: hot flashes, your own private summer, even if you live in frosty Michigan. Hot flashes, night sweats, mood swings, dry skin, dry genital parts, and that can lead to painful intercourse. You could have bone thinning, bone loss. So all those things are important because if you think about having bone loss in your body, that includes your teeth, your jaws. So you may start losing teeth, believe it or not, or you start having problems with your dentition, and you're wondering, what's going on? Why am I going to the dentist now when I don't eat candy like I used to when I was a kid? Well, it's not cavities now, it's actual bone loss. Those are things that people often don't think about. Weight gain, you're doing everything you used to do. You're working out, you're watching your diet, but you still can't seem to lose that weight. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Memory changes. You start feeling like you have pregnancy brain that you had when you were pregnant, not remembering easy things. Then you start worrying about, am I dementia? Is it Alzheimer's? And, especially if there's a family history, you start worrying about those things. But generally, there is some memory loss when you become truly menopausal. And those are just to name a few. However, there are some lucky people that have no symptoms. They go directly and just smoothly float into this new portion of their lives, and they have had no issues. And I know we secretly hate all those people.
I want to sign up for that line.
Right. But
How
it's
do I
true.
get that?
Right, exactly. How do I get it? How can I be on that bandwagon? But there are people who are lucky enough to experience no issues.
Sure. Sure. Well, it's interesting you say about bone loss, because I was just at the dentist and had a tooth extraction, had no idea. And they said to me, it could be because of you're in menopause. So I feel like there are, more and more symptoms we seem to be adding to that list. So, we've defined it. We've talked about the symptoms, but, it's important to note there are 61 million women over the age of 50 in the workplace, all dealing with this while they're at work, a lot of them in the height of their career. I had my own personal incident on the news desk several years ago when I was in the end stages of perimenopause, where I had, heart palpitations and anxiety, and I was looking at words in the teleprompter and I recognized them, but they couldn't come out. I couldn't read them. I couldn't process what they are or were. And so it has been a big part of my life to advocate for women who are dealing with that same situation, so they have somebody to talk to. Jen, I know you had an experience as well. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so first, thank you for sharing your story, Tamsin. I think it's really important for these stories to be out there. So mine actually began in my early 40s, which felt really early. I started with brain fog, anxiety, and depression. I run a multi-million-dollar company, and I was at the peak of my earning potential, my early 40s. And I love my work, but it's a thinking job. I'm in the knowledge business, and I literally could not think. These emotional and physical symptoms made it really impossible for me to work. So I actually went to my business partners and I went to my husband and I said, listen, I'm going to need to retire early in my early 40s. And thankfully, they encouraged me to keep on, seeking out help for these symptoms. And ultimately, I did find a clinical team that was well-versed in perimenopause and menopause. And within 6 months, I felt like myself again, which was great. But what I know from writing my perimenopause survival guide is there are women all over this country. They are struggling, they are suffering in silence, and they are leaving the workforce. And that's not just concerning for women, it's really concerning, I think, for our economy as well.
Yeah, there's no question about this. Leslie, would you want to jump into that one?
Yes, similar story actually to Jen. So about 5 years ago, I started a new job on, senior role. At the same time that I decided to come off the contraceptive pill, I was 46. And I thought, ironically, I came off it because I wanted to get my hormones into balance. And I was getting regular periods. So but I also, suddenly my sleep was getting really disrupted. I, like Jen, was getting, brain fog, forgetting things. People would come up to me at the water cooler and share something. And then by the time I got to my desk, it had completely gone. And that kind of created more anxiety. Unfortunately, I ended up leaving my job after just 8 months of being in this, opportunity. I didn't actually discuss with anyone. I just sort of felt so rock bottom in terms of my confidence that, actually in the UK, I was, one of 10% of people that leave the workplace. And my background's research. So it was only when I sort of then went online, spoke to my doctors, that I realized that coming off the pill had sort of, exacerbated this estrogen withdrawal. And that's really what compelled me to set up Over the Bloody Moon.
And let's talk about that. You work with companies to help them better support people, like all of us. I know you talk about your personal experience. Talk about what the company actually does to help other companies out there that, that honestly might be hearing about this as an issue for the first time with their employees, because it's not something a lot of companies have talked about as of yet.
Yeah, and I know sort of in some ways, like the US, I think is a few years behind the UK.
Yes.
So actually, when I first started this, I felt very much that I was like knocking on kind of, closed doors. But we are a collective of different menopause specialists. We're doctors, psychologists, HR specialists, coaches, etc., all on a mission to educate workplaces. So we provide a range of different services. We do education workshops and events and panels. We run accredited training programs for people managers, because it's so important across every industry that line managers are able to spot the signs and signpost people. We also run an e-training program that cultivates frontline ambassadors, that they can also provide support, not to replace doctors, because that's absolutely critical that people go and see a healthcare professional, but just can create a protected space. We've spoken a little bit about our stories. There's vulnerability in that, and people are very scared sometimes that they're going to lose their job. So we kind of go through with organizations pro-menopause behavior, how they can be and demonstrate allyship alongside other learning resources as well.
So, I want to ask you, Leslie and Dr. Cannon, why is work often incompatible with symptoms? I mean, in a lot of ways, I feel like it's because really we haven't talked about it very much until recently. And so there perhaps not been a way for them to know. And at the same time, women are at the height of their career later in life than really we've ever been.
Well, first of all, Leslie, I think you need to take a sabbatical and come over to the States and give some seminars, because you're right. I think that people just don't discuss it. It's not something that people really thought about. And quite honestly, women aren't valued and in the workplace. We make less money. Those are all the things that can really compile and then become a huge problem. So there are so many reasons that menopause can be incompatible with the workplace, notwithstanding you're working in a building and it's you're burning up, but it's cold outside. So the heat is on and you're like, where's the fan? Where's the air conditioner? I can't take it. If you're having a hot flashes, hot sweats, and all of a sudden your underwear and your undergarments are saturated because you've been sweating, now you got to bring a pair of panties in your purse to work. I mean, it's just all the things that are just really incompatible with you being effective in the workplace. And Leslie, when I think about you having to leave your job over something that is just natural, it's disheartening. And I hope that there's, an outlet or that we can provide some solutions so that this does not become commonplace. So, I think that there are so many issues that can be ameliorated just by, if you go out to get some air, if you can, or get a quiet moment to collect yourself before you blast everybody in the conference room, because you have this mood swing or, and then quite honestly, sometimes those swings, it comes as an angry outburst, but really it's your own depression and anxiety. Tamsin, I can't imagine being in front of a camera. I've, several good friends who are news anchors or work in television, and just the thought that you're frozen because you cannot process, that is frightening. You don't know, am I having a stroke? You literally don't know what's happening. So if you're able to get a quiet moment, to just collect yourself before you just lose it, you've got to do that, because all of the things that are happening to your body, they can cause so much depression, anxiety, and then you've got chronic stress, which could actually lead to other medical conditions. It can affect your blood sugar, believe it or not. Chronic stress can lead you to diabetes, insulin resistance, all the things that people do not think about. The body structure and function are interrelated, which is what we believe in osteopathic medicine. So if one thing affects you, it's going to affect your entire body. And I think that there are opportunities for us to let this be known, whether you start with HR or whomever. But if you're having sleep difficulties, you can't work, you can't think, you're exhausted. And quite honestly, when you are trying to sleep and you have a hot flash, your brain cannot control your body temperature. So you can't get the rest that you need. So, there's so many things. And I think that the main thing is that if you are in a workplace that's managed by males, or quite honestly, females who are not empathic, it's not always men, let's not always blame them, then you may not get the support you need, and you have to self-advocate.
Yeah.
So, you've got to be able or willing to speak up. And if you feel like you don't want to do it yourself, just quietly discuss with some of your friends to see if they're having the same issues. And then you guys go together as a collective. Now, if you don't want to be the one to bring it up, then that's when you nudge your friend and be like, so do you think you might want to go? Whatever you need to do to make this happen.
Well, I'm glad you say that, because I think that there is power and there's strength in that, of feeling confident to be able to go alongside somebody else with that. But it raises the issue of it, and I always say, like, I can't wait for us to not use this word when we talk about menopause. But the word taboo just makes me so frustrated, because the fact that this is taboo in 2023 for us to talk about. But I get it, because as a journalist, I didn't talk about menopause. I didn't say the word menopause or vagina on the air. I didn't say menopause until the last 2 years. And now I've said it 100 times. But why, Jen, let me ask you this. Why do you think it is still so taboo in the workplace, in other places, but in the workplace in particular?
Well, I'll start just generally with our culture. I think it's because historically menopause has not been seen as a health condition. It's been, I think, instead associated with sex and reproduction. And I think if you look across our culture, we have had varying levels of comfort with women and sex and reproduction. So I think, it's not surprising. I actually have found many women, like friends, uncomfortable talking about perimenopause and menopause, even just like at a wine group or a book club. Like there's this like weird silence of, why are you suddenly talking about this all the time? So just as we, I think, don't always talk about sex in the workplace, for example, I think that's the same with menopause. It's not surprising that it would be seen as taboo. And I think it's why these conversations are so important. I had someone say to me the other day, did you ever think you would be the face of perimenopause? And I thought, gosh, that was not actually what I set out to do. But really, if I can do anything, and if we all can do anything to talk about this more, to shatter that taboo, I think we're really doing a service for women. Just talk about it matter-of-factly, because there is no shame in a health condition. We're not ashamed if we have diabetes. We're not ashamed if we have cancer. We should not be ashamed if all of us, if we are lucky enough to live a life long enough to go through perimenopause and menopause, we will go through it.
If I could chime in with that too, I agree with you wholeheartedly, Jen. I think that part of the issue too is that menopause is seen to be such a horrible thing. Nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about when they're menopausal, because that means you're old, right? So now we're getting to the age where that is more prominent. But I also think that we are learning to be more vocal about things and talk about things more often, and that's important. But I would submit to you and all the listeners that menopause should be viewed as a celebration, not so much a horrible thing, because number one, you're still on the earth. You know what I mean? Yes. There's alternatives to not being menopausal. You might not be here. And number two, you don't have periods anymore, just saying. There are women who come to me every day and say, I don't want to have a period. I don't want to have one. So let me help you not have one. Let's try something to make that not happen. So it doesn't have to be a horrible thing. You just have to learn how to adapt to the actual state of menopause. It doesn't have to be awful. And I would also submit that you talk to your younger family members about it, so that it's not such a new thing when it comes to them. And also so they can support you, so they can know how to help you if you go through these things. The little handheld fans in your purse that you hold up at this, the games, they have one on the side, they'll pass it to you. All the things.
I'd like to add a point around responsibility, which is, as obviously, menopause can happen, to Dr. Cannon's point, at any time after someone's period. So in the UK, the youngest person was 14. But we have a responsibility as Gen Xers to talk about and share our stories and to normalize the conversation, because our parents, our mothers, didn't experience menopause in the same way. We are the first generation to be, at the peak of our game, whatever, we're doing. For those that have families, they're starting families later on in life. And that means that the biological timing of menopause isn't always planned. And we have our parents who, hopefully are, living longer, but also with aging diseases. It can, for those that experience menopause in midlife, come sort of with a collision of other things. So we have a responsibility to, you know, speak up and to talk about the vulnerability, but also the positive narrative, because we are going to be the role models, and hopefully this won't be an issue, you know, in a few years' time for the next generation.
You know, you're so right about that. It's interesting. My husband now has started to talk about menopause because he sits at the end of the dining room table during the work week and hears me talk about it constantly. And then I was with my 11-year-old nephew this weekend, and he said to me, "Aunt Tamsin, I'm watching your videos about menopause." And I said, "Well, what do you think it is?" He goes, it's hormones and getting hot." And I thought, that's amazing. He's a little young, but that's amazing. Amazing for him to be able to grow up, though, with those words crossing his lips at 11 years old and being able to know and respect and understand it. So, you know, little steps, right? That's where we are. So I want to ask you, Dr. Cannon, when you work with patients, do you see a difference based on a race or cultural background or socioeconomic factors on how women experience stigma or shame around menopause?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that, you know, I think that depending on your culture, your family, the way you were raised, many times you are expected to just be quiet and deal with it and be stoic and not say a word. I find that more with people of color, where they're advised, you know, it's just what it is. It is what it is. You move on and you keep it moving because you got other things to do. You're trying to keep your kids alive. You're trying to keep, you know, work and keep all the things going in the household, not because you're a single mom, but because that is what you do as the wife or the mother or the partner. And then, you know, all of the things get bottled up, and then all of a sudden it may just explode on you. And then what happens? Because then you can't help anyone. I always tell patients, you have to take care of yourself. Self-care, especially now, in the way things are going in this world, self-care is absolutely the most important thing. Because if you can't care for yourself, how are you going to care for others? Even in pregnant women, you've got to take care of yourself to take care of your baby or babies. So I think that it is a huge, plays a huge part in that. I think that care providers need to take the initiative, because we all don't ask about things. Well, you know, they come for their annual exam if they're a certain age. Well, how are things going? And then they start talking about their family and things like that. Well, how are you? Are you still sexually active? Is sex enjoyable, or do you have the desire to have sex? Is your vagina dry? Because if your vagina is dry, ain't nobody wanting to have sex. Just saying. So, you know, but there are remedies and treatments and things that are natural. I think that sometimes women don't want to talk about it because they're like, I'm not taking another pill. I'm not doing anything else. I don't want any medicine. I'm trying to get back to my natural body state. Yep. The menopause is not helping by keeping me in that natural state. And I don't want to add another artificial thing to my body. Well, there are things you can do that don't involve that. Acupuncture, believe it or not, relaxation techniques, therapy, whether it's, you know, going to see a therapist or having some type of massage therapy. There are so many things that do not involve a medication and are natural that we can do to enhance our self-care, that it doesn't have to be that way. And I think that some women are like thinking they're going to be viewed as lazy or a complainer if they say something, but they're suffering inside. All of that anxiety impacts how you really can deal with the menopause. As I stated earlier, it certainly can affect things like your blood sugar. But even so, if you become menopausal before age 40, that's going to increase your risk for heart disease. Who would have even thought that? Right. I mean, there's just so many parts to it that you have to ask your healthcare provider, and your healthcare providers need to ask you. It's a partnership, shared decision making.
It really is. And it's also knowing how to advocate for yourself, because I know that, you know, sometimes we're just grateful we got into the appointment, right? And we have those 5 minutes with them, and you don't even know what to ask. So I'm always encouraging women, like, write it down. Yes. And I don't care if it's in your sticky notes on your phone that you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of your symptoms, of your, whatever it is, because I think that, you know, that's the only way around it. Are there some ways, and I want to go back to workplace a little bit, because I think it's important, and you can't separate any of these things, but are there ways to go back to normalize the talk about menopause at work, especially in a male-dominated profession? Because we touched on that just briefly, but you know, I just feel like nowadays we have to look at it like, again, advocating for ourselves, whether it's in the doctor's office or in the workplace. Jen, are there good ways to do that, or good ways to give women some advice on that?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, Tamsin. I think it really depends on the person and the workplace, because menopause here in the United States is not a covered condition unless menopause is brought on by surgery. So, I have to be frank, you need to be careful because it's not a covered condition. With that said, in the US today, we are in a very tight labor market. Women in menopause have incredibly valuable skills and experience. And I do think workplaces are evolving. So, for me, I would say, talk about menopause as a health condition, talk about it matter-of-factly without shame. And, when it comes to male colleagues, I have been absolutely shocked because many of them have been much more sympathetic than I would expect.
Yeah.
Many of them have said to me, gosh, I'm so glad you're talking about this because my partner is struggling. She is really having a hard time. I cannot tell you the number of men who have reached out to me and said, thank you so much for writing your perimenopause survival guide. They're happy. They're happy that their partner has a resource. There's actually information for them about how they could be supportive. So I would just say first, just think about your own employer first before speaking up, because you want to be in an environment that is supportive of this issue. Secondly, talk about it matter-of-factly without shame. And thirdly, don't discount your male colleagues. They could very well be very, very supportive.
Leslie, I know that the UK is ahead of us in so many ways, and you have done a lot of things to make sure that women can help build workplace cultures and encourage talking about it. What can employers or the HR folks do for workspaces as well? Because I know that, Dr. Cannon, as you mentioned, I have a fan that goes around my neck with me all the time, and I sit there, that's what I do with it. I can't wear it on the air, but I carry it with me. But there are different ways to change workspaces as well, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So we talk about it as workplace adjustments or reasonable adjustments, and that will vary depending on sort of, someone's individual experience. But one of the common aspects, which I think Dr. Cannon spoke about, was kind of, brain fog or forgetfulness, which and in open plan offices, or if people are on the shop floor or factory floor, wherever there's kind of noise and people, it can be quite distracting. So some things that are helpful are introducing noise cancellation headphones, being able, if you can, depending on your type of work, to find a quiet space to do that. And also in the way in which instructions or information is given, to have that written down rather than verbally be expected to retain that. Looking at things like scheduling for people that are on shift work, we know that those people that work on night shift anyway get it can be quite difficult in terms of sleep patterns, which has an impact sometimes on poor, mental health. So looking at an ability to change a shift, if somebody is doing a job that requires them to start early on, is it possible to kind of shift that so they start a little bit later? When maybe they're feeling more sort of, in their stride. So adapting that is also very important in menopause or perimenopause, to be able to take breaks. If our mind is busy and doesn't switch off, then the only time it can process things that happen in the day is like when we're in bed, and that's what often kind of wakes people up. So having like mini breaks is important. And there's been a lot of great organizations that we've seen that have looked at their uniform and equipment to make sure that from a health and safety perspective, they're reducing risk, and also some issues around embarrassment and shame. So for example, Tesco, our postal organization, Royal Mail, have Tesco is a grocery store, by the way. They've introduced uniform that is dark, that covers if someone's got flooding, which can happen for some people, and also the material is layered and breathable and more natural. So lots of different ways that people can have a conversation with their managers or team colleagues.
Tamsin, can I go back also to, I love all of that, Leslie, and I want to see more of that in the US. I also want to share, there was a research article that came out recently. I think it was in Harvard Business Review. And it talked about how when women are upfront in the workplace about their symptoms and the fact that they are in menopause or perimenopause, they can be seen as actually confident and emotionally stable. Whereas if they don't talk about the symptoms or they don't reveal that they are actually experiencing perimenopause and menopause, they can be seen as lacking confidence and emotionally unstable, which I think is really scary from a perspective, working with colleagues. If they think if you're emotionally unstable, that doesn't look good for you. So I think that really points out the importance of talking about this more. It turns out actually, and I do a lot of research and work in the field of empathy. It turns out when people understand what you're going through, they're more likely to be empathetic. So I think that really encourages all of us, hopefully, to pull back the curtain and talk about this openly. It's something that many of us are going through. And as long as we're open about it, I think people will be accepting.
And we did a nationwide study to celebrate International Women's Day last year. It was the largest study in the UK to understand why people thrive or barely survive. And to Jen's point as well about talking, we found that the more communities, the more networks, the more open people are in and out of the workplace, the more likely they are to describe the impact of menopause as not at all or very light. So talking about it is actually, helpful for alleviating symptoms.
Yeah, people fear what they don't understand. So if you don't say anything, then you will be seen as mentally unstable, things like that. But how else are you supposed to feel if you're perimenopausal and you haven't had a cycle in 3 months, and all of a sudden it's a flood and you soil your clothes or you soil your work chair? How do you recover from that? I mean, it's a slippery slope, but even something as simple as wearing more comfortable shoes, if you work on a cement floor, if you work outside in construction, wearing layers so you can take off some layers or put some on, things like that are just instrumental. And, I can't say enough about empathy and kindness in general.
Yeah, I feel so encouraged by feeling like, you've got one person and then people, I'm sure all of you have that, people coming to you all the time asking specific questions, because when they feel like they're not alone and they feel like they're not, something's wrong with them and not normal, that's where that confidence comes from. I know when I was quiet about it, I felt kind of very invisible, very irrelevant, very afraid. I grew up with a mother that died early of breast cancer. So I didn't have that part. And nevertheless, a lot of moms didn't talk about it back then. And once I actually started talking about it and got over my fear of being irrelevant as a result of it, my confidence grew in a different direction. So I appreciate what all of you are saying, because it is very, very true. And I'm sure you're seeing it with all of the communities that you reach, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I've had women who have reached out to me. I have a lot of family members who are teachers, and they've said, listen, it's really hard. I don't get breaks. It's hard for me to use the restroom. And that's so, I think, dangerous in a way. I'm sure you can understand this better, Dr. Cannon, but women, I think, in perimenopause and menopause are more likely to get urinary tract infections. Well, where do those come from? Well, when you can't go to the bathroom. So, I do think if we can start asking our employers for minor things like, I need, an extra break in the middle of the afternoon because I need to run to the restroom, or I'm on a factory floor and I need to be able to, make sure that I have periodic breaks throughout the day to go to the bathroom. Those are humane things that to me don't feel like a huge ask of our employers, and they would make such a big difference to women in the workplace. Fans, I think, sure, we can all bring our own fans to work, but we can also ask our employers, give me a fan. For me, when I was first starting with perimenopause, I would go to bed at 8:00 because I knew I would be waking up 3 or 4 times during the night. I was lucky, I was self-employed, so I would just start my day a little bit later. Telecommuting, remote work is such a big part of our culture now. I think, it's perfectly reasonable to ask if you can begin your day at 9:30, 10:00 versus 8:30. So I do think, even though we are behind, Leslie, compared to the UK for sure, and we have some work to do, I think if we start asking our employers for these very minor adjustments, I love that word, versus accommodations, I think we might be surprised to see how accommodating they actually could be.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Tamsin.
No,
I
go ahead.
was just going to say that one thing you could also do is because pregnant women have the same issues with going to the bathroom. So it just takes a couple of minutes to generate a letter to just something that they could give to their employer or to HR, human resources, just to say please allow an extra bathroom break or something like that. And then the other thing I was going to say is, well, one of the things that can cause, holding your urine, not only UTIs, urinary tract infections, but if you are menopausal, sometimes you feel that discomfort because your vagina is dry, atrophic vaginitis that comes with menopause, which means that you have no estrogen or, from your ovaries, making your tissues more moist, and that impacts the strength of your tissue, which can impact how your bladder can control that urine. You may not be able to hold it. So now you're wearing poise pads and Depends to the office, which is not a cute look because they're thick. Just saying. You got to think about those things. So certainly that goes back to discussions with your provider, but it really doesn't take much for you to just write a note if you need to. But then at the same time, if you're like, oh my God, I don't need them to know this either, then let's start doing other things.
Right. And I'm glad you said that, because I think that goes to the point of that we all want to advocate for what we need inside the workplace, and that what we need for bigger change. So everybody's not individually having to walk inside their workplace and having a conversation like this for the first time. Many may not be comfortable with having the conversation with themselves, more or less, with a male or female boss. How do we encourage or advocate for change in a larger way right now?
Well, just to share something that we've done in the UK, we found that so we've been working on advocacy and encouraging an intersectional conversation. It can be quite difficult, can't it, to empathize without really sort of putting yourself in someone's shoes. So we've developed Menovest, which is a heated garment that anyone of any kind of industry sector can try on, aimed at men, to experience what it's like to have hot flashes and be on the job. And we've given them sort of, a role play, an overnight challenge the night before. So it's been quite remarkable, actually, in terms of kind of, the impact of managers and people, in all different sectors, realizing on the job the challenges, that women have to kind of, go through. So, immersion or finding creative ways in your organization to develop empathy, is another sort of challenge, maybe.
Yeah,
that's a good one. Yeah, that's good. It's like when you give them that little labor,
right?
And let them see what that feels like.
I have like 5 people I'd like to give that vest to.
Indeed.
I love everything you're saying, Leslie, and you've really inspired me. When I think about the workplace, when I first started in the workplace, this is years ago, there was maternity leave. That was something we had as a policy. But even back then, paternity leave was not an issue here in the United States. We did not have that policy. We did not have family medical leave. We didn't even have lactation policies when I first started in the workplace about 30 years ago. I would love to see more employers create menopause policies. And you've inspired me to start that work. I think we need to start having conversations with employers and saying, listen, half of your workplace, if not more, are women typically. And we need to create awareness. We need to create policies that make it comfortable to be a woman in the workplace, beyond age 40, because we, if we begin perimenopause in our early 40s, we could be working for 20 plus years in this health stage. So I think helping employers see how important this is going to be something I spend the next couple of years doing. So thanks so much for motivating and inspiring me.
I think, policy and guidance is absolutely critical, because it shows commitment from the organization, and particularly as organizations are trying to retain talent and attract talent based on their sort of stance on inclusion and diversity. Menopause is, sits very much in, the heartland of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we go, I want to get best advice about menopause to give to our audience, because I always think it's important to have a actionable or a takeaway. Everyone's coming at it from a different place and a different time and a different experience. But is there, and I'll go around, and Dr. Cannon, I'll start with you. Best advice on menopause. I know you listen to patients, for years. You know what they're dealing with, the number of symptoms, and then everybody comes at it from a different way. Is there some best advice that you could give us?
So one of the things that I always tell the OBGYN residents and students is a quote that says, if you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready. James Brown actually said that, but it's true. If you are ready for these things, then you know how to approach them. So, celebrate menopause. Don't dread it. Be ready for it. And then you can be your best self. Also, don't just, block out or not share with the younger women in your family or your friends. Let them know what's coming so they can stay ready. Because although we always like, oh, the change, we're going through the change, it's so depressing, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't have to be. You're your best self. Think about it this way. You can't get pregnant anymore. Free love. I'm a gynecologist. I'm all about love.
Yep.
Safe, free love, let's say. But also, in a more serious way, just know that, this people may not know your struggle. They don't know your story, particularly if you're not vocalizing it. That doesn't mean you tell all your personal business. Oh, I'm going through menopause. But, really just try to be purposeful, intentional, and advocate for yourself, and just know that, give yourself some grace. And what I mean by that is, if you're having some problem, if it's hard for you, there are so many people out there that are having the same issues. So you're not alone, but you got to find your people.
Yep. Thank you. Jen, Leslie?
Yeah, I would just double click on what you said, Dr. Cannon. Prepare early. I was knocked off my rocker when perimenopause hit me. I had no idea what it was, totally caught off guard. I didn't know what to expect. And actually, that's why I wrote my perimenopause survival guide. I don't want women out there to be in the dark. So for me, I'm going to prepare early. I'm going to, make sure I seek out resources before I go into menopause, because I can be empowered and ready now because I've already gone through perimenopause. So I would say, prepare early, get yourself ready so that you can actually thrive, in this stage of life.
Yeah.
And I would say, take charge of your change, own your menopause. Something we haven't really spoken about today is, there are so many interventions and ways we can manage our menopause and continue to thrive. And that will be individual for different people. Again, our research in the UK found that hormone replacement therapy, which I think you call menopause replacement therapy, is it menopause?
We go back and forth, I think, with it.
Yeah, hormone replacement.
Anyway, that was the number one most effective way for people to manage their menopause. Not everybody can or wants to, but we also found that there are lots of effective, natural ways to manage menopause through herbal medicine for those that consult with an accredited, professional. Stress, we've heard from Dr. Cannon how important that is, and how that can be an amplifier for symptoms. So stress management, often as well, it can unearth issues that we've put, under the carpet for a long time. So properly addressing that in menopause is, amazing. Once you address your fears and issues from the past, you can move forward. And sleep management, addressing nutrition, movement that is strategic for our, for menopause. So it might not be high impact. It might around strength and resistance, building up muscle, which improves our mental health, our metabolism for brain as well as body. So there's so many different ways out there. So I think I would like, today, as much as we've spoken about the challenges and the needs to educate, for people to know that there are lots of interventions out there, and the sooner we take action, the better we will thrive through perimenopause. But also that has a huge impact in terms of our senior years and our long-term impact. So, don't put your head in the sands, research what's out there, advocate for help, and take action.
And start having conversations, talk about stuff.
We have some questions, so I think they'll hit on some of those things, actually, Leslie. So I will let whoever wants to field them. Some medical, some not. So the first one: do you have any tips to dealing with insomnia and anxiety?
I have one, and it actually builds on what you were saying, Leslie. So here in the United States, I think there's a lot of fear still associated with hormone therapy. There was a study a long time ago that came out that showed that inaccurately that hormone therapy was incredibly dangerous. So when I hit perimenopause and someone suggested hormone therapy, I was like, wait a minute, I don't want breast cancer. Like I will never do that. It took a lot of research for me to realize that actually that study had been completely incorrect and that hormone therapy can be incredibly effective. And for me, taking progesterone was a complete game changer. I went from incredibly anxious and sleepless for about 6 months. I could not sleep through the night, to sleeping like a baby. I mean, you're going to have to pry that progesterone out of my dead hands. It is the best thing I have ever taken. So, I would say that has been incredibly helpful. And then as you mentioned, Leslie, in terms of stress reduction, stress really impacts our sleep. It impacts anxiety. So, I basically walk, 6 miles a day as a way to manage my stress. So both of those things have been incredibly helpful for me personally.
Dr. Cannon, I think this one will probably be for you. I experienced menopause at an early age in my 30s. However, I'm 60 years old now and periodically still experience hot flashes and other symptoms. Is this normal?
That is normal. And don't rule out other causes. So this is an opportunity for you to talk to your primary care provider and your OBGYN, because believe it or not, after menopause and you stop having periods, you still need your OBGYN, dry vagina. So there are other things, but absolutely it is a normal thing. But don't forget, could it be blood sugar issues? Could it be thyroid issues? All of those things could come into play. And the fact that you said you became menopausal in your 30s, remember that I said that if you become menopausal before age 40, you're at higher risk for heart disease. So certainly you've got to make sure that you're seeing your primary care provider regularly so you can approach those things. And then, just see what your symptoms are. And if you don't want to try anything hormonal, let's think about the natural options, because there are a lot of them.
Yeah, there sure are. Okay, symptoms are so random when perimenopause starts. How do you know if you've reached the perimenopause stage? And is there a test my doctor can give me?
Is that me? It said doctor.
Yeah.
You are absolutely correct. The perimenopause it is random, because again, it could be other things. I mean, you're having heavily bleeding for 3 months and then nothing for 4 months, and you're like, am I menopause? It certainly could be perimenopause, but it could be that you have fibroids. It could be that you have a polyp in your uterus. Again, it could be thyroid issues. There could be other things going on. So, the question is, conversations. There are tests you can do, but I'll be honest, sometimes when they say, well, can you check my hormones? It's not really helpful, because all it's going to tell me is, yeah, you're perimenopause. And then you're like, well, why did I spend $100 million for you to just tell me what you knew? Well, because you insisted, and I'm just trying to help. But seriously, it can't, I think it's less effective if you're still having periods. But there are other hormones we can check. Like I said, your hemoglobin A1C, which checks your blood sugar control for the previous 6 weeks or 6 to 12 weeks to make sure there's no diabetes involved or insulin resistance. Checking your cholesterol levels. And sometimes there's an insurance issue with OBGYNs checking those things. But go to your regular healthcare provider. So there are tests that you can get if you're perimenopausal, but you probably get more help from suggestions from your provider of things you can do to navigate that area.
Okay. Have you heard of any, sorry, I'm just knocking these out because I want to make sure we get to all of them. Have you heard of any solutions for those who may need a break? I'm a high school teacher who can't leave my kids in the classroom to go cool off if I'm having a hot flash.
I think this goes back to having a conversation with your team, your line manager, sharing, what's happening to you and why you need to have a break. So there needs to be some flexibility, around that. And I think the more, it might be that is the first person that shares what's going on for them, but then, it's other people will follow, and then it will become more normalized.
Yeah. Are you allowed to have a fan in the classroom? Something like that as well. I think my pregnant patients go through those things too. And sometimes it simply is there's no staff. There's no one that can come and watch your students while you even go to the bathroom. So in those cases, you probably have to be a little more creative, but I am sure you're not the only teacher that's having the issue. So again, conversation.
Am I more at risk for cervical cancer once I go through menopause?
So cervical cancer is generally caused by human papillomavirus. You're usually not more at risk for that if it's solely due to menopause. Now, one thing I will say is, as I was jokingly saying, well, you can't get pregnant, you still need to be careful if you don't have a partner that is not your regular partner, you're not using condoms, because again, you still could get HPV, human papillomavirus, which is what leads to cervical cancer, but menopause itself does not.
see. All right. Those are our questions. Well, I want to thank everybody for being here. I've learned so much today, but I really appreciate it because I think everybody adds so much to the conversation. I know you all are reaching huge communities on your own. So thank you for all your insights today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And of course, thank you to Prevention and Healthy Women for bringing us together to talk about menopause in the workplace. And thank you, our audience, for being here as always and being part of the movement to change this conversation about menopause everywhere. Take care.